I'm Jason Nguyen. I'm a filmmaker. I'm a creative director at Westbrook Inc., Westbrook Media, and I've been making stuff for the internet for the last decade. That's kind of my thing.
Welcome to The Vietnamese. I'm your host, Kenneth Nguyen. Being part of a culture of nearly 100 million Vietnamese people in the world today comes with a lot of pain, proud history, and privilege. Join me as I highlight and explore the Vietnamese experience from all over. Going through your work, I've seen this sort of early capturing of who you were. Was that something deliberate and intentional to be caught on camera or to capture yourself on camera at such a young age?
Yeah, I think, most people who I think film themselves at an early age, I think the thought process for me is that it's out of necessity, right? It wasn't like I wanted to put myself on camera because I had aspirations to be an actor or aspirations to be on camera for a long time. I just wanted to make stuff with my camcorder, make stuff with my video camera, and a lot of the times there wasn't anybody else around. So if I was going to make something, I could be in it and I could be the subject in front of the lens, and I could take that footage and I could kind of teach myself how to edit and teach myself how to do movie tricks that I would see and pick up. And that's sort of why I wanted to do it in the first place. I think it was just the start of being creative and the start of my creative journey.
It's some crazy shit because it's like really creative and it's really vulnerable and it's very thoughtful and very aware as a young child to say the things that you did. And it's beautiful how you put it all back together to sort of like, that was me. I wish I could become more of me like in those years again. Um, some of them have really moved me to tears, and I don't say that lightly.
Yeah,
You do mean that.
I appreciate that. I think, I had this big sort of come to Jesus moment as a creative because I think everybody goes through it, especially if you live in LA and you're trying to be an artist. It gets hard, right? And I think for me, the question I needed to ask myself after all these years was like, who am I making this stuff for? Right? If I'm making stuff for me, like if I'm just making stuff as an artist and not for a company, not for a brand, not for a celebrity, what am I doing it for? Who's my audience? Because I've never really played the social media game, right? I do it for work, but I don't do it in my personal life, right? I'm not on that content grind, but I just want to make things. And so when I started to think about it, the answer that feels the best for my soul is I make stuff for that kid version of me who is like, I wonder if he's going to keep doing this, right? I wonder if he's going to stay creative and just make things for the sake of the joy of it existing. Um, that's kind of why I made that video on my Instagram and kind of what has been motivating me lately to put stuff out and to create, right? You do it for your kid self.
Yeah. Um, we are going to get into the work that you do because obviously I find it, I mean, I'm sure the world probably finds it very interesting
Right.
to hear about the work that you do, but we're going to get to that by getting to who you are first.
Yeah.
And the things that I was really impressed by was I think it was you at 18 doing stand-up comedy. So it's a little bit of a departure from the early kid you doing it.
Right.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed it. And I love comedy. And
Yeah.
I wanted to know like that point of going from speaking into the camera and talking to comedy, like why did you go to that route?
So the idea of instant feedback, right? I think it's like why most stand-up comedians do what they do. Actually started younger than 18. I started at 16. And I'd be sneaking out, telling my parents I was at theater practice and then going to do open mics in Portland, right? So the reason behind that was most of my childhood up until high school, which is when I started doing stand-up, I was a really introverted kid. I was only ever extroverted or outgoing when I was playing like make believe, right? Like when I was coming up with stuff in my imagination, putting myself on camera for things just to be like I didn't know, just to be a filmmaker at the time, right? And but when I would exist in the world, I would be really shy and not like know how to talk to people. And then when I started getting into stand-up comedy, I started listening to people that really made me laugh and really envying that ability to like just touch an audience, right? So I got curious. My friend randomly signed us up for an open mic night in Portland, drove us there, and I got up in front of a bunch of random people and started talking, and people started laughing. And that instant feedback of, okay, this thing is funny, this thing isn't, was like really, really fascinating to me as a kid. Because when you make stuff like little short films and you don't show it to anybody, there's no way you know if something is good or bad. But when
Yeah.
you tell a joke and somebody doesn't laugh, you know right away that that joke doesn't work. So it was a really interesting way, I think, for my younger self to start experimenting with like, what does an audience think is good or is not good, right?
That's crazy to have the balls to do something like that at 16. It's insane.
It, yeah, but it was like in my mind, it was like, what do I got to lose? Like, I wasn't ever afraid of people thinking I was weird, which is a gift, I think,
Yeah.
right? Because I think, I think at a really early age, I just sort of accepted. I was like, I'm a weird kid, and that's fine, right? And so if I go up and do stand up and nobody laughs and nobody cares, this nobody's gonna know. Who's gonna know, right? It's not like I'm bombing like in Carnegie Hall, or I'm bombing, right, like in front of millions of people. It's not. It's literally like 20 people in a comedy club. What's the worst that can happen? That was my mindset back then. It's still my mindset kind of now. It's like if you can reduce your sort of expectations of what the failure outcome will be, you can get through the fear a lot easier, right?
That's some hard stuff to do, you know?
Yeah.
That's some hard that's a hard state to attain, is to first of all be aware that you need to get rid of that. And then the second
Yeah.
part is to be strong mentally enough to say, you know what, fuck it. I'm gonna push it to the side and I'm gonna just plow through this stage. I'm gonna get to the headshot. I'm gonna try to do
Yeah.
some stage time at an open mic. And that's hard to motivate ourselves to break through this creative sort of space.
Yeah, but I'm glad I did it because it started to wire my brain in the right direction,
Mm.
which is like, you don't always have to be so precious about people's opinions about you, as long as you feel like you get to say what you get to say, right? And some of the best stand-up comics say what they need to say, and we resonate with it because it's true, not because it's funny. It's funny because that's what they're good at, right? But it's hilarious because it's true.
And how do you know when you are doing work for other people, which we'll
Hmm.
talk about, and doing work
Yeah.
for yourself, that you are bringing out the truth in your client, in the work that they're trying to present, versus you're the director or you're the content creator for them? And how do you know what the truth is? Because you know your truth, right? Because you've been doing it for a long time.
Right.
But how do you know what their truth is? How do you get into the spirit of what they're thinking or what they want?
Yeah, I think the easiest route is a simple conversation, right? If you're ever making stuff for somebody, try to have that early talk of like, well, what do you think is good? What do you think is hot? Right? What do you think is cool? And it's less about like, what do you want to say? Because a lot of the times they won't know that answer, right? And that's why you're there, because they don't really know. They have so much they want to say or so much they want to get across. It's a shotgun blast of stuff, and your job is to sort of focus that beam. It's more about like what's a line on tastes, right? So with a lot of the people I've worked on, I've been lucky that their taste and is sort of attuned to their personality, right? What they like comes across in how they act and how they treat people and their sense of humor as well. So it's easy to marry the two things,
Mm.
and get a good result. So it's really about what do you like, and the voice part of it will come, because I think people come to celebrities and people of interest because there's a certain quality about them that they like, and you're there to you're there to heighten it with different formats of media and creation and content, and all that stuff.
Yeah. And then it goes back to, for me, why did you leave comedy? Investing so many years into it in the early
Yeah,
days of your life is like compound interest when you invest money. The longer you do it,
yeah.
the better you get, the more sort of eyeballs you get, and a real career can come out of it. So I was like, and you were good. I mean, at 18, that video for me that I watched was like, oh my God, he's got so much confidence, and he got chutzpah.
No, thank you. I think it's what's funny is I don't think I've left comedy. I think I've just left one way of doing comedy, right? Like stand up for me taught me sort of the hard ropes of what is funny, what isn't funny, right? And you kind of need that. But I think at the core, when you look at the stuff that I made as a kid, and then you think about what I wanted to do just overall, I still do want to be a filmmaker, right? So where's that intersection? That intersection for me was sketch comedy, right? The stuff that you see on SNL, the stuff that you see on Mad TV, the stuff that you see like Key and Peele do. I was like, how do I do that? And that's sort of where my trajectory went. When I moved to LA, long story short, I got a job doing sketch comedy at a company called Nerdist that was owned by Legendary Pictures. And then I made a bunch of sketch comedy videos. Sorry, my cat's walking across my screen. I made a ton of sketch comedy videos for them and was a part of their long running sort of video comedy team for a while before I made it to Will. And when I made it to Will and Westbrook, it was
Let's
sort of an
let's
extension of that.
clarify.
Just
Will is Will Smith.
Will Smith. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
Will Smith, and
Willard Smith.
produ- his production company is Westbrook. Or is it the
Correct.
it's production company, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's a production company. It's a creative agency. It's a bunch of stuff. But yeah, it's Westbrook Inc.
And you're responsible for creating content over at Westbrook.
Yeah, so I work on the media side of the fence. I'm one of the creative directors on his team that is tasked with sort of coming up with the creative. I'm a lot of the times boots on the ground directing the creative for his social media, right? For stuff that goes up on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube and all that fun stuff.
How did you get there? You were talking about Nerdist, and
Yeah, so that's kind of the path. Like it's the same answer for both questions when you ask how did I get here and why did I not continue to stand up? I think I got here because of my long time work at Nerdist Industries and at Legendary Pictures. I worked there for 8 years,
wow.
and it was a long time, right? So the cool part about that job was it was my like filmmaking boot camp because we would be given a budget for the year and we would have to allocate that budget into making sketches that would release every week, right? So it was up to us how fancy a sketch could be. Every week we had to put something out. And when you do something like that, you start to get really acquainted with, well, how do I get the most bang for my buck, right? How do I spend my money wisely, but also get viral content out of this stuff? And a lot of it was centered around pop culture. A lot of it was centered around, IP. A lot of it was centered around just parodies of things that you already know, that you're comfortable with, but adding a new perspective to it. And that sketch work, eventually got me my job at Westbrook when they asked me to come on in the pandemic.
That sounds like the work that you did at Nerdist sounds like basically SNL on social media.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. SNL on with no budget. Yeah, yeah. The Kirkland SNL for sure.
The Costco SNL.
Yeah, Costco SNL for sure.
That's some funny shit. I mean, and let me ask you, when it comes to being funny and having a deadline,
Yeah.
okay, so what are the criteria? Like, how can you knock that out? What sort of like things on a checklist are there so you can target these kind of KPIs, right? These things that you have to like check off for metrics.
Yeah, a lot of the times it's looking ahead at like what's coming out and planning it around like cultural moments that we know are going to be talked about, right? Like if Game of Thrones is going to have is the most talked about thing, then we better have a Game of Thrones sketch, right? It's a lot of it's topical. A lot of it is trying to stay ahead of the eight ball on what is coming out and how do we get ahead of being present in that moment and making that joke. One of the thing I think one of our most successful sketches at Nerdist was we turned Tommy Wiseau into the Joker. Tommy Wiseau is the guy in the room that I'm
Room.
sure that you've heard of him. And I saw a meme that was him photoshopped as the Joker. And then that meme sort of went viral. And then I was like, you know what? We should just make that happen. So, through a lot of things lining up, we got Tommy to agree to like put on the Joker makeup and make a video, and it went viral. So that's sort of the mind path. That's an example of the path creatively that we would be thinking about when we would be making our sketches. Like, what are people talking about? How do we capitalize on that conversation, and then add to it with whatever we're doing, and cross your fingers that it's funny, that
Uh,
people think it's funny.
I could see the trajectory for you would probably be to become like a Judd Apatow, right? Is to make these feature films and comedy. Is that something that you think about?
I think about it all the time. Yeah, yeah. And I think my sort of like I guess journey right now is to decide if the stories I want to tell are pure comedies or if they are some hybrid of something else. And I think like a lot of directors who start in comedy, comedy never leaves, right? There's still always going to be an element of funny in the stories that I want to tell, but I don't necessarily know if they're going to be pure, comedies.
Well, why do you even have to worry about it? Can it be a blend of anything? Science fiction comedy, it could be a drama.
Yeah.
I mean, but why is it important for you to even bring that up and not just do a comedy thing that has some attachment to it?
Well, because I think when it comes to like the feature like game, I think comedy is one of the hardest things to sell, right? It's one of the hardest things. And by sell, I don't mean monetarily. I mean like convince somebody to let you make a comedy,
Right.
right? It's a lot of pieces, but also the stories aside from that, the stories that I've been drawn to that I want to tell um have a touch of realness to them, have a touch of like heart to them, and I know they're going to be some hybrid mix. So it's not that I'm worried about making a full comedy. It's that as an artist, I don't know if that's like exactly what I the stories I kind of want to tell right now. I don't know if they're all 100% funny, but maybe it's the time. Maybe I'm just depressed. I don't know.
I love your answer because it shows so much thought and intention because you could have just said, yeah, I want to be Judd Apatow, I want to do some comedies, but you really specifically said that you wanted to pair up with, like maybe another genre or something. And it just shows
Yeah,
me that this idea of like where we are, where you are in your headspace is a very important thing to kind of like say, hey, this is not just comedy. This is not this
right.
parenthetical. It's a lot more. There's a lot more emotions going on.
Yeah, I think every good artist draws from everything they know, right? And it just so happens, hold on, my my cat scratching my TV. Wait one second. Yeah, every good artist I think draws from what they know. And right now my scaffolding, my building blocks as an artist is comedy, right? It's what I know the best. But I look at I look at recent filmmakers who do a beautiful job at bringing in that sort of comedic background into their work, and it still shines, but it's not necessarily a pure comedy, right? Like
Yeah.
the Daniels or Taika or Jordan Peele, like all of these guys who had comedy roots, but don't necessarily make pure comedies. Not that there's anything against pure comedies. I love a good old stupid comedy, you know? Um,
But
I
you're talking
just,
now comedy with like social awareness levels, like Jordan
right,
Peele, right? Taika. These are big names that incorporate this idea of like what's bubbling underneath a horror
right,
film, right? There's a
right.
contextual bullshit that's happening that
I,
that
I
really
think
resonates with people.
Yeah, and for me, I think it's so fascinating that like take Taika as an example, somebody who is so naturally funny, right? Who is so naturally gifted at comedy and knows that world really well. What We Do in the Shadows is hilarious, knows format, knows what actually sells a comedy movie to turn around and do like Jojo Rabbit
Yeah.
is and Thor
Yeah.
is fascinating.
Fascinating.
And I think there's a bit of that draw for me as an artist to be like, okay, I think maybe there's a world of filmmakers who don't need to be
Pigeonhole.
one thing anymore,
No.
right?
Mm-mm.
And that's great. That's exciting.
But that's hard to do too, right? That's hard to do. I mean,
Yeah.
what did Taika get his start? Did he do Flight of the Condors?
I think he worked a lot with those guys, Flight of the
Mm.
Concords.
Concord, yeah.
Yeah, those guys he worked with early. I mean, those guys were in some of his earliest works, but his early movies were beautiful, right? He had a Oscar nominated short film that was amazing. He made Boy, that was beautiful. Hunt for the Wilder People. So he's been a great storyteller
Yeah.
for a while, and I think that's my compass, right? Is I know when we talk about genres and we talk about like navigating multiple things, yes, that's difficult, but at the end of the day, telling a good story should be at the heart of what you're doing. And if you can't tell a good story, then you got to spend a little bit more time practicing
Yeah.
that skill.
I can tell you have a good head on your shoulders. And here's why. Here's why I say that is because you understand the back end side of what needs to happen to make a good product, a good story. And beyond that too, you have the connections to do that at this point in your life. But let me ask you, what is the next step for somebody at your level? Because you have the technical know-how. I'm sure you have the people. You can put together the package for the money, and maybe you have a few script ideas that you've written and
Yeah.
playing around. What needs to happen from where you are to becoming a Taika or one of these guys that makes their first feature film and then they land on the map?
Yeah.
You're like, oh shit, that's Jason Nguyen. He was on the podcast. What does
I,
it take to go from
yeah.
where you are now to being on the map, quote unquote?
Yeah, money. Y'all, whoever's listening, financiers, I'm just kidding. No, I think you want the heady answer. That the answer that I'm literally thinking about every day of my life is like a real commitment to myself,
Yeah,
right?
I
I
was
know
just
that's
thinking, why are you so chicken
yeah,
shit? Right? I don't know. That
yeah. It's less. Hey, maybe I am chicken shit. I think for so long, and this might like lead into a whole other conversation, but for so long, um, I I felt like I had to prove myself in this industry in the arenas that I was in,
yeah.
right? Like being the only Vietnamese creative, like just being so young too, starting in the industry. I started producing sketches at like age 20, right? With like real budgets. And I didn't know how to do that, but I figured it out. And so I went from producing to writing to directing. And I'm so sorry. Let me move my cat out of my. Yeah, she's just loud. Can you hear?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, cool. Um, yeah, so I went from writing to producing to directing, and some mix of that, and I felt like I needed to prove myself in this world, and I was building sort of my team, like the people I wanted to work with, and like who I knew and how this worked. And then the pandemic happened, right? Like right when I was like, all right, it's time to invest in myself. Pandemic happens, I get offered this new job, and this job is unlike any job I've ever done before, right? I don't know this world, right? I don't know what it's like to be on the inner circle of celebrity culture and like be on a stage that's this big, but in a platform and a structure that is so short, right? So learning that, teaching myself that, like I'm addicted to learning. And so at some point I need to stop using that as
Yeah.
the thing that is stopping me from doing what I want to do, right? And I think that's starting to happen. That's starting to happen, but it took me a long time to get there.
And what about the writing? Will you go back to writing, putting together a feature script and doing?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm working on right now. That's what I'm working on right now. I'm writing some features that I feel passionately about. I'm working on some short films that I've shot one already. I'm gonna shoot another one. So I'm really sort of like really starting to invest in myself now. It just took a long time.
No, what is your day to day at Westbrook?
My day to day at Westbrook. So a lot of the times, I'm not just across Will's desk. I'm across like a bunch of other accounts, right? So often it's having meetings, pitching to clients, pitching social ideas, pitching ideas to new clients, and then if I'm not pitching, I'm executing those ideas, right? It's going out and making them and filming them, capturing them, and after that, I'm in the post process. So it's a constant churn of writing, shooting, editing, finishing, right?
So you're
Across
basically
a
like an
bunch of
arm,
people.
like a mini production arm of Westbrook to say, hey, I have an idea. Here's how we can monetize this particular kind of like window of a story. You pitch the story, you write the story, you go and produce it, and then you edit it, and then you pop it on the website or the social media.
Yeah, yeah. Luckily we have a lot of great support. We have a great post-production team, and we have producers, and we have people who are here to help bring stuff together quickly. But that's sort of what it is. Yeah, it is sort of an extension of what I did at Nerdist, but at Westbrook with Will and with other brands and clients.
Yeah. Why do you think you were tapped to do the work that you did or you do?
That's a good question. I wonder about that all the time. I think, look, I think I know what I like, right? And I've always been confident in what I like, and my taste is still developing and building, I'm not unsure about what I like, right? And so I think lucky for me, what I like aligns with what Will wants to put out and what Will's team wants to put out and all the people above me at Westbrook want to put out. And it's a sense of personality being the heart of anything you make, right? So whether that's a comedic video, whether that's a motivational video or behind the scenes, people are there because they can't get enough of who he is as a person, and he's for a long time been such a good example of personality coming through genuinely, right, on the internet. And I think maybe my taste and my sort of unwavering no hesitation decisions on what I like and what we should do may have contributed to it. I think I also had a good chunk of time when I first started at Westbrook, not doing Will stuff. When I first started, I was sort of like a creative director, gun for hire through Westbrook for
Hmm.
Alicia Keys and Pink and John Boyega and all these other celebrities, and really learned to navigate that relationship, right? Right? Creative director to talent, what that talent relationship is like. So when it came time to doing stuff for Will full time, it was it was easy. It was easy. So there wasn't any fear or hesitation doing it. And I think maybe that's why I was tapped to do my job. And
That's a great
I'm
answer.
good,
Yeah.
maybe.
I
Maybe I'm good.
mean, I love the confidence. Well, it's
Yeah.
it's you bring up this alignment factor a few times, but do you
Yeah.
ever worry that your ideas or your Midas touch to produce these things that are inherently your alignment drying up? Do you ever worry about it? Like, wow,
Yeah.
this shit gets like what I'm doing is getting old. Like, I think
Yeah.
about that with the work that I do. I'm like, God, is my questions getting old? Am I like an old dude and I lose relevance in the questions that I ask? Is that something that goes through your mind?
Every day, every day, every day. And I think the thing, maybe my biggest learning from working here at Westbrook is that there is beauty in collaboration, right? And of course, you know that working in any sort of collaborative art form, right? And filmmaking is a collaborative art form, but so is content creation, right? And I think a lot of content creators are so used to being an island, right? Being a
Mm.
content factory on their own. And there's a lot of merit when you feel rusty, it's probably because it is musty. So hit somebody else, right? Hit somebody else, bring somebody in, get a new perspective. The beauty about working with Will is that we have so much access to amazing artists and amazing creatives that we lean on and that that we collaborate with to keep things fresh. But you should always be questioning if you are in a field where you have to consistently put stuff out. Is it fresh? Like, is it good? Like, you should always be asking that.
Asking questions in this podcast sometimes are, it's easy and sometimes it's hard. Like this question I'm about to ask you, I got to figure out how to do
Yeah,
it where it's
yeah,
delicate. But I read Will Smith's autobiography before all that went down at the Oscars, and I
right.
saw what happened. And because I understand where he was coming from with the protection of people that he felt like he failed in the past, I understood it on that level. And anybody who follows Will Smith and is a fan and who's been sort of like in the trenches with him and watching his journey can probably empathize and understand like what that really was all about, if they followed it.
Hmm.
But I'm sure that you have a perspective on, because I'm doing the math and I'm realizing that during the pandemic and everything, when you got called in to work at Westbrook, this was your sort of like your foray into
Hmm.
this universe, and you see that this
Hmm.
happened, and this was probably on your watch in the early days. Can you talk a little bit about like how you felt and what kind of all went down from your perspective and internally for you?
Yeah, look, I'll be straight up and tell you that I'm limited with the things that I freely talk about right now. But
Yeah.
what I can say is no matter who it is, whether it's Will, whether it's a singer, an author, a teacher, a dad, you have to have empathy in moments where you question if it made sense, right? Where something happens and it's shocking, you have to sort of take a step back and have a human moment and sure, pass your judgment, right? You're going to do that anyways, right? Decide how you feel, but then once you're done doing that, take a step back and think about the human aspect of this all, and think about how insane it is, the job of not just being a celebrity but being a superstar.
Yeah.
And I think there's a difference between being famous, because fame is an ever-changing thing nowadays, right, with social media and the influencer culture. But being cut from the cloth that he's cut from, being this sort of iconic figure, this superstar, right? Think about how insane of a job that is. It's an insane job. You're so busy. Everybody wants so much from you. And the worst part of it all is that there is a very, very specific image of what you have in of what you are in their heads that you never asked for, right? Now, again, none of this is excusing any sort of behavior. I think we can all agree that nobody should hit anybody, right? But at the end of the day, have a little empathy for somebody going through something at a weird moment. If like he was your family member and that happened, you
Yeah.
you would probably be like, whoa, why did he do that? Right? Instead of passing judgment and just only, being negative about it. But that's easy for me to say because, I'm on his team, but I feel bad for everybody involved, and that's sort of my perspective, just broadly, is,
Yeah.
is that it sucks. It's a
Yeah.
dumb thing that happened, and let's move on, right?
But it wasn't like a bar fight where you get caught just spur of the moment, you get enraged at a bar fight, and then you're like, well, what the fuck was that all about? No, this is something different. And I think that empathetic, that feeling, what you're saying is like, I don't even know the guy, but I feel like I get it. I understand like when you have this like pent up like childhood issues that you feel, a certain way, and your family member you perceive it to be in a tough situation, you react. And if he was my family member, I would not feel upset or judgy. I would feel, oh my God, my heart goes out to what
Right.
you just went through.
Yeah, and look, like I can't assume I know the reason or try to inform from anything that I know about him, even being on his team. All I can say is that it's an unfortunate event, and like nobody was thrilled about that, right? And that did nothing good for anybody. But we should be able to see it, move on. I think everything that has yet to be said about it has been said by both parties, and that should be good for y'all.
Yeah.
Like
Absolutely.
if you're still
Absolutely.
worried about it, then you love drama. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Now, when you think about like all of the things that go, the content that's being produced in your world, Westbrook or whatever, like how do you sort of like put together like thematics, right? Like some I've seen on mental health, some I've seen on production, new production, things or that have talked about, talking points of podcasts before. Like, how do you figure out what goes on the content of social media for Westbrook?
Wait, say that again. Like, ask me that one more time. So, how
How do
does
you,
mental health play
no, yeah, there's
to the
different
content, or
topics. There's different topics that I
right?
that I see. I mean, because it's sort of like it all falls into the brand of
Mm.
Westbrook. But how do you gauge sort of like what topics? How do you balance out and calibrate the percentages of mental health or new series that you guys are producing, or just talking heads? How do you figure what goes on? What's the feeling that you go by to post these things on the social media page for Westbrook?
Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff we're drawn to, I think at the core is comedic, right? Will is a funny dude, and I think levity is always important in the world, and so a lot of the stuff we lean towards is funny, but I think it's just beyond funny or not funny. I think genuine is what we always strive for. Um, a sense of a sense of authenticity that I think he's great at, and that's the stuff that we look to program, and the stuff that we put out is there's a lot of Westbrook's work. It has sort of an authentic heart to it, right? Like it's real opinions, real voices. When you think about the stuff that we do on the Red Table Talk side of the fence, it's
Yeah.
unfiltered. And then when you think about the stuff we do on the Will side of the fence, it's unfiltered, right? Like we just put him out as he is. Like one of my favorite things I got to work on is a show called Best Shape of My Life, that we put out on YouTube, and it's a story about Will trying to lose 20 pounds quickly, right? Because in the pandemic he felt like he was in the worst shape of his life, and I think being able to like share that journey and like share it authentically and put out a picture. That's one of our most viral posts, is putting out a picture of Will with his tummy out, being like, I'm in the worst shape of my life,
I
right?
remember
And
that.
the yeah, there is something special about somebody who can do that and step past their ego a little bit, and try to connect with people who are just like him. And again, I don't want to come off as altruistic. It's not like we're doing world changing stuff, but I think for anything you're doing online, I think authenticity is a big factor.
No doubt. And that's hard to do. It's not easy.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Now, when you analyze, and now that you're very close to the African American entertainment set, the groups of
Hmm.
the African American set, and you think about Asian Americans or Vietnamese
Yeah.
Americans, what can we learn from a group that has been in that world and has been striving to make their mark all these years? And what can we as a community of Asian Americans or Vietnamese Americans learn from the African American entertainment community?
I think we share a lot of the same values. I think there is for African American driven entertainment, there's a tenacity that has now been starting to break through, right? And that tenacity crosses genres, it crosses different media types, from film, television to the internet. And I think it's inspiring to see the stories that do get told. And I think a lot of the things that I've seen is just this mutual respect for other people's work that I think gets championed a lot in that community. And when I think about the Asian American community, I think what is sort of cool, but also an interesting challenge to navigate, is that Asian American and Asian AAPI is such a big pool, right? And our cultures are different, and it is this right double-edged knife of trying to get more representation across the board for Asians in the entertainment industry, but there's also this perception that, right, that are we the same community or are we different, and how are those differences playing out? And I think I would love to see a lot more maybe unity, across the board um, for our community, right? Like different different groups coming together and championing each other's work. But I think that work is happening. I think that stuff is moving right now, and hopefully I see more of it.
You're right about how different I mean between Korean, Japanese, Vietnamese,
Yeah,
Chinese, Indonesian culture. It's
right.
different. It's, I mean, for all intents and purpose, it's just different. It's entirely different. But when you look at the African American community, it's all English speaking, and they all come from the United States, and it's all sort of like
Right.
one block of people. And the mobilization and the history of all of that block of people have been here for hundreds of years, getting together, and the tenacity that it took. We weren't even born yet to know that that's part
Hmm.
of that history. And here we are just showing up in the last maybe 30, 40 years. Specks of Asian America is beginning to show up on the big screen. And maybe in the last 5 years, we are now sort of getting, screen time, but we have a long way to go, don't we?
We have a long way to go. We really do. But that is, when it comes to race in this country, it's slow moving, and it will always be slow moving. But what I'm excited about is that we are now in the game, right? We do have a dog in this fight now, and like you said, we are newer to this process than the African American community, right? They've been pushing through this since the birth of entertainment, right? Has
Yeah.
has been intertwined in that process, and to finally see windfalls for them now must be a unique experience, right? For to feel like, oh, now we're breaking through, and what about the 100+ years, right? Like for Asians in America, I think we're on the same path. But what excites me and also interests me is how do we leverage how massive this community is to support each other's work across different cultures, right? Because I think a lot of the times, we are put into our pockets, and that's cool too. I want to see more stuff from Vietnamese Americans, right? And I'm excited to see what comes out of this community, and that's okay, because it's okay to celebrate that our cultures are different. But I think across the board, I would love to see cross-cultural support, right? People shouting out different people's work, right? A Korean American director shouting out an Indonesian director, and an Indian director shouting out a Chinese director from the north. Like I want to see more cross-cultural support. And when I say I want to see more, I don't mean that that doesn't exist. It's that I'm excited to see more,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, because it creates a sort of brand trust. Like when you have dope Asian American creators talking about other Asian American creators, you get the seeds of a creative community that is strong. And you think you see that in African Americans in the entertainment industry. There is such great cross pollination with people being sort of put on, right, and championed, and that's awesome. And I think maybe there's a path for us to do the same.
When I think about Westbrook and I think about the projects that I see, which is like Cleopatra or
Hmm.
Jinja or these very niche titles that inspire their community, African American community, and I think to our community, and we have a plethora of these legends and myths and identities
Right.
that IPs that we can put out, and they're shared too. Some are shared
Right.
within all of us, but what is the reality of the numbers? Because Jinja and Cleopatra are for a segment of the population. Let's face it, we're in a white dominated world in the United
Hmm.
States. And when a project like Cleopatra or Jinja comes out, how well do they do? I mean, we as Asian Americans are even smaller. We're a fraction of the black population. So is this business all about numbers and eyeballs, or we make a good story like Crazy Rich Asian, and everybody's like on the bandwagon. Like, how does this work?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I agree with that. I think, I can't speak to Westbrook's numbers because I'm not sort of tapped into that department, so I don't know how well anything does, and I try not to know. I think if we're talking about this project, it's a testament to Westbrook wanting to just tell the stories they want to tell, right? Like even if it's niche. And I, the elephant in the room, and you can feel whatever which way you want to feel about it, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, is that yes, it does take a hit for us to start getting the conversation rolling, and it'll come in waves, right? Like Rich Asians open the door to a lot of conversation about the Asian American community, right? And then you'll get another project and another project like that. And I think we got to keep it up, right? We need more projects like that, but it's gonna take box office success,
Yeah.
which is hard, right? But it's not impossible, and that's what I mean by tenacity, right? That's what I mean by tenacity is that it can happen once, it's going to happen again. And not to say that there hasn't been AAPI stories out there that aren't doing well, right? Like you think about Minari and you think about all of the things that have happened in our recent past. The Daniels, like it's the fact that that won Best Picture is heartwarming to me, right? Because it is an Asian story, but it's a universal story that won Best Picture and it swept the awards. And to me, that's a good sign that we're maybe moving in a better direction, right? And
Yeah,
it was a box office hit. It swept, right? It cleaned house. So that's a good thing.
it's a good thing. Have you gone to Vietnam?
I have, yeah.
When did you go back?
I went back. It was a crazy experience. I went back in October for my grandma's funeral, and I hadn't been back in 21 years. And it was so fascinating because when I did go back, I was born there. I left the country when I was 2. I went back when I was 8. And when I went back, I got really sick. So I don't remember anything. I was like really feverish. I had an infection. I had the mumps. So the whole time I was back as a child, I was sick the whole time, in and out of hospitals. And now going back as an adult, I have all these cousins who have really distinct memories of me and distinct memories of us doing things. I don't remember any of it. So it
Wow.
was really like relearning sort of this secret history that I have that I have no recollection of, and them sort of telling me what I was like when they met me, what they thought about me. And going back to Vietnam now, it's so fascinating just how how optimized for tourism it is, and how like there's apps now. You can just get on the back of somebody's moped and go anywhere you want, and it's crazy. But to have that still in the heart of all of these markets and people and street vendors and people just trying to make it throughout the day is crazy. It's
And
crazy. It was a crazy experience, really eye-opening.
yeah, do you follow the entertainment world in Vietnam?
I don't as much as I should. I don't as much as I should, but I know that there's a big effort to do more over there right now.
Yeah, there is. They're cranking out things, but our sensibilities are very different. Vietnamese
Yeah.
American versus Vietnamese and Vietnam. Storytelling is good. Good storytelling. It will always be good storytelling, but at the same time, I always have this question of like, when we go back as Vietnamese American directors or producers, how much of the understanding of the culture do we really have for the general understanding of Vietnamese people in Vietnam? And the answer is like sometimes it's like we think we know, but we don't know. It's hard to know.
I can easily say that I don't know. I don't know, right? Like, I just did my first photo project, which is a sort of a tangent, but I did my first photo project, and it was about gun violence in the Asian American culture, and my mom wanting a gun. So I shot these photos, but I didn't put it out for 2 years. I shot it 2 years ago, and I didn't put it out for 2 years because I didn't. If there's one thing I'm not confident about, is like how will Vietnamese people feel about me and what I want to say, right? And what will they say about seeing somebody in an Ao with a gun in the same image? Will there be judgment? And recently I got past that and I was like, you know what? All I can tell are stories I know. So to me, it's a Vietnamese American story because that's what I am, right? But when it comes to a purely Vietnamese audience, that's still a gray space for me. I don't know what that audience is looking for. I think there's a lot of different things going on. There's different senses of humor. There's different like there's different levels of what they think is good storytelling, right? So that's something I'm curious to find out more about. What do you think? I'm curious to know. Are you more involved in that world
Yeah,
or
I've been, in contact with that world for, the last 2 decades. And, my brother lives there. He's been there for 20 years. And some of my film
yeah,
partners have been there and lived there. And I go back and spend time, and I've developed some feature film projects. But I have two right now that I really want to make, but I don't know,
yeah,
are these Vietnamese American fairy tales in my brain going like, yeah, this is going to work for the Vietnamese box office? I'm scared.
right.
I think I asked my guests like you for permission, like, what do you think? Do you think a good story is a good story, or you really have to have some cultural nuance understanding of what the hell is going on to make something that will travel? But I'm in both worlds. I think a lot of times, like some people have said, I dream in Vietnamese when I sleep. So I
Yeah,
do speak Vietnamese and I understand the culture. But again, the framework and the way it's being delivered is going to be through a trans-Pacific, Vietnamese American lens. So I don't know,
yeah.
is it worth the gamble? I'm very not confident about it. So that's why I ask people like you.
I stay optimistic. I stay delusional sometimes. I feel like in order for my brain to work, I just need to believe that good stories will cut across gaps that you might not be able to solve strategically, right? Like there's a reason why everybody knows who Indiana Jones is. There's a reason why, Star Wars is as big as it is, and those are franchise examples, but I do think there is merit to just telling a good story and and hopefully that story is a universal story, but that could be a pipe dream, right? At the end of the day, it keeps me writing, so I'm just going to tell myself that.
Well, yeah, I mean, but
What do you think?
if I think if you're creating something and you're writing something for shooting and consumption in America,
Hmm.
your way of seeing it is a very unique way, because there's not a lot of Vietnamese American, from that perspective. There's not a lot of anybody who is seeing it the way you're seeing it in the United
Yeah,
States that you come from. So being from wherever we're from, and we were creating some sort of like narrative, makes sense because it's still going to be a fresh narrative coming from within the United States. But man, when you start putting cameras in Vietnam and telling, like coming of age story for a Vietnamese kid, I
hmm,
could tell you like, but that's another discussion that I wanted to talk with you too. It's like I could come up with like these story beats for this character coming of age in a kitchen or on a
hmm.
stage wanting to become a pop singer. But how do I know it's quote unquote connecting or funny to the audience or heartwarming to an audience that has different dispositions, a different taste than I do?
Yeah, that's a tough one because, I think American audiences are quick to let you know what they like, right? We see things trend here. We can sort of forecast sort of what it is, like the appetite for creative is. And I think that's something I'm curious about. Is like what do you think the appetite, like what do you think most Vietnamese people look for, like broadly?
I could tell you the three movies that like knocked out of the box office. Well, the first two's family, and then the third one is like this action film. But all of them revolve
Mm,
around like the sort of like the a darling of Vietnam. Trấn Thành is the first two.
yeah,
He did
right,
Yeah and Nhà Bà Nữ, which are two movies. They're family comedies,
right,
but they both
right,
star him. Jung Tan. Jung Tan is this like big, Ryan Seacrest kind of guy with
right,
very,
right,
yeah, just a very smart guy. He's young too,
right,
and he came up with
right.
two amazing films that like killed it in the U.S. and I mean Vietnam. It's like one did 18 million, the other did 22 million. Most
Yeah.
box office, average is like 6 to 7 million. Highest
Hmm.
before he released it was 12 million maybe. So to hit up to like 17, 18 million, and then to make one for and that got 22 million and crazy US box office numbers. He has an
That's
understanding of
awesome.
the zeitgeist of like what people want to feel.
He might be the person to ask. You know what I mean? He might be a person to that's what I mean. Like I know it's a long shot sometimes, but like that's what I want more from this community is that if the pool is so small, let's share wisdom, right? Like with each other. And if there's something that he's been able to unlock, I would love for him to be a person that maybe connects to this filmmaking community over here more. And I think also broadly, like if you're saying the things that do well are two family driven stories, then you have to sort of Trojan horse it, right? Like,
Yeah.
is it a coming of age story and that's wrapped up in a family story, right? I always think about like when I do think about like fringe ideas and like how people started out, right? Like, and I think about these bigger ideas from the genre films I grew up on, like Star Wars, right? Like, how did they pitch it, right? Was it like it's a space a western, or it's a right? It's a aliens is it's a creature feature, but in space, right? Like, what is the Trojan horse thing
Hmm.
that you're going to get people to understand right away, and then give them the real story, right? Give them the coming of age story, because if you can get them on board, I think their appetite for story is going to be higher. Because I can see like a movie like Everything Everywhere All at Once in Vietnam being super confusing, right? Being tough to understand because we as Americans understand the genre of interdimensional travel
Yeah.
and sci-fi and kung fu, but then at the end of the story, the Daniels wanted to just tell a empathetic story about a mother accepting her daughter. But if you go out and pitch that, people might think it's boring. So it's almost like you flip it on its head. Like, how do you tell the family story but secretly tell the coming of age story, right? If that's what's working, or how do you sort of put the action parts in a easy to swallow pill, but it really still is like a heartwarming story about whatever you want to tell. So that's where my brain goes broadly without knowing the details. But that's sort of like how we do it on social media. It's like people like funny, they like weird. How do we do it, but also stay genuine to
Hmm.
his personality? So it's if I can take those learnings and apply it to a bigger stage, like that's what I would do.
What does it mean to be Vietnamese too nowadays?
Vietnamese American or Vietnamese,
You tell
or
me.
is that the
How do you
same
see
boat?
yourself? Yeah. How do you see yourself? Vietnamese American, or nothing at all? Like if you are
It's
Vietnamese, and so wherever that lands.
I think I think yeah, I'll be really honest. I think for me, being Vietnamese has always been an identity crisis for me, right? Because you're coming up in this, and again, this might be a universal story to a lot of Asian Americans, but I think for me growing up, you're told that the culture you're born with is so radically important, right? You have to learn the language. You have to not forget your past. Because I'm born there, and my parents are born there, and my brother was born there, and all we speak at home is Vietnamese. But then on the flip side, you're also being told that if you don't fit into this culture here, American culture, you won't succeed. So in the third grade, I had my name legally changed by my parents to Jason, right? I grew up with the name Finn, right? That's my Vietnamese name, Finn, right? And they were like, we're going to legally change your name because you'll be more successful with an American name, right? But at the end of the day, if my Vietnamese starts to slip, I get in trouble. So I have always grown up with this idea that being Vietnamese is an identity crisis. What do I want? What do I want? What does it mean to me? But at the same time, it's a prevailing culture. There's something about our culture that has continued to push through in this country, right? Whether it's our cuisine or the stories we want to tell, right? A lot of the times there is an intrigue there that I know needs to be tapped more, right? And I think that's how most Asian Americans feel about their own cultures, but I do see it with our culture. So that's a long-winded answer. The real answer is I'm figuring that out. I don't know. All I've ever known surrounding me are not Vietnamese stories, right? Growing up in media, watching media. The Vietnamese stories that I did grow up with were so niche and specific, right? And a lot of them was wrapped up in music, right? Like Paris by Night and that stuff was such a big interest to my family. It was never like, let's watch whatever's box office in Vietnam right now. It was like, let's watch Paris by Night. So I'm trying to understand now as an adult with more resources, and that's why we got connected, and I got connected with Jess and Cape, is that I want to understand what being Vietnamese means more to me, and hopefully, um, for me, the story I want to tell is a story of finding comfort in this country, right? That's my parents' journey. My parents' journey hasn't been the American dream. They've never been rich. They've lived on the poverty line for a long time. My mom worked at Goodwill for 35 years and never changed her job, right? She still works there. She's going to retire this year. My dad jumped from like factory to factory, making sort of minimum wage. And they were never unhappy because their goal was always comfort. So to me, being Vietnamese is seeking that comfort always, whether in food or music or entertainment. We find things that are comfortable and we cherish them. Food is such a integral part of I think all of our stories, right?
Yeah.
Because it's comfortable. And that's sort of the movie that I'm writing, is this chase for comfort, right? About my mom and finding this chair and finding the most perfect chair. And so that's to me right now what it means. To me, two answers. I'm figuring that out. But if I were to look at my parents and look at the Vietnamese people around me that I grew up with that I know, it's finding ways to be comfortable in a second home, right? And if you're Vietnamese American, right, finding ways to be comfortable in your community because you're different, right? Because you might not come up with a bunch of Vietnamese, but that's because that's the story I know. I didn't grow up with a ton of Vietnamese people surrounding me. I only had my family and small pockets of community, but definitely not didn't go to school where there was a ton of Vietnamese people.
And where did you grow up in Oregon, you said?
I grew up in Vancouver, Washington. Vancouver, Washington. It's 5 minutes across the way from Portland, Oregon. Um, and I went to a public arts magnet school with a graduating class of like 60,
Wow.
right? And I was the only Vietnamese kid. And then coming to LA, right? It wasn't like working in the field that I worked in. There was a lot of Vietnamese people doing comedy, doing the things I did, but finding this community now is exciting. So
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna I'm gonna get to answer that question hopefully soon. But if I'm being honest with you, I haven't known for a long time, right? Because all I've known is this American sort of way of thinking about things.
It's a beautiful answer because I share that with you. Confusion, chaos.
Confusion, right? Yeah, identity
Confusing.
crisis, right?
Yeah, because I was born here in 75 and um growing up in the 80s and 90s, being Vietnamese man is totally confusing. You never saw an image of ourselves making out with anybody on screen. Not an Asian woman, not a white woman.
Right.
Up until
Yeah.
recently with the Tourist Guide to Love, you know, we didn't see that. And in fact, we got to see something like a fun mirror twisted image of us. It was like we
Yeah.
got to see some dork geek that
Yeah.
geeks today and nerds today have a very different shine to these terms. But when we were
Hmm.
growing up, it was really below the bottom of the totem pole. It was just horrific. And I think
Right.
even now that we're gathering steam and we're becoming more confident and we're becoming more assertive as a community, those scars are still very deep inside of us.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Totally. Like it's you don't think I see I'm so envious of all of these projects that come through and I'm like, man, I wish they were just Vietnamese. Like I see like beef and I'm like, man, what if we had a beef? Like
Yeah.
I get so and I'm proud, but I'm envious at the same time, right? Because I'm like, I know we're capable of that. It's just we're not seen that way right now.
But all it takes
And
though, Jason, is for somebody to write it, because I think the
mhm,
pipeline and the the community of really polished filmmakers and creatives in our space.
Hmm.
There's a lot of us. There's actually, I think
Yeah.
it's it I don't know if it rivals things like a tech space or a finance space in New York or whatever, but I could say the Vietnamese in entertainment in LA is a pretty
Hmm.
big pool of people from like people have been working since the late 90s to today. There's a lot of people who are still in the business and arguably, like music doesn't have as many people. I would even go as far to say as chefs in the US are not as bountiful as people in the Vietnamese in entertainment throughout the country.
That's exciting to hear about. And it's just like I'm just starting to get connected to these people. And I wonder if there's people who are shining in their fields that feel like, where are all the Vietnamese people? Right.
Yeah.
And have a hard time connecting. I think this idea of connecting feels old, but also feels new, right? The way we're able to connect. I think we're able to connect better and we're working at that. But it needs to be prolonged connection, right? And it needs to be connection that feels like we are championing each other's work, and um that stuff goes a long way. It goes a long way.
Yeah, one thing that I've noticed is that everybody is willing to work together and everybody wants to work together, but there's always tension bubbling underneath the surface. Of course, that's humanity, but I think the option of talking shit and putting each other down like publicly or doing it in spaces where you have to collaborate, I think it's very controlled. I mean, from what I see, the new generation still carries over some of the trauma and sort of the scarcity mentality that our parents had. And that's understandable
Hmm.
growing up in war and colonialism and communism and all these
Yeah.
things. But at the same time, I think we are learning how different other communities like Koreans or the Jewish communities are doing
Yeah.
work where they're really protecting each other to make sure that their vision comes up into the big screen and translated into money.
Exactly. And I think it has to be sort of that radical acceptance of each other, and really being purposeful about your support
Yeah.
and not just being passive about your support, because it goes a really long way, and we can see it working for other communities, other disenfranchised communities that are coming up. um, yeah, I think good work is out there and good people are out there. It's just how do we stay connected, and I think to your point, like we need a universal story, and Crazy Rich Asians is a universal story because there's a bit of relatability to that, but it also is a big story, right? And feels like a movie, and I understand why it hit box office numbers. And I think, going back to your question, like what does it mean to be Vietnamese to you? I think as storytellers, we need to all start thinking about that together, right? Because I could tell you right now that, like, I'm 30, I'm a millennial, right? And growing up, I had a hard time relating to Vietnamese stories because a lot of the Vietnamese stories that were being told were war stories, right? Or they were stories outside the country that sort of just didn't represent us. And I think on outside of just regular representation, my insane pipe dream is to also have Vietnamese people do genre and to do fantastical things that aren't necessarily grounded in reality, but be the sort of world builders that are creating those things. Like I would love to see a Vietnamese led like Game of Thrones or sci-fi project, or genre project, because we have those stories to tell. Like where's our James Wan, right? Like I want to see stories that are just bigger than just people sometimes, right?
Yeah.
But that's my pipe dream. My dream right now is just, hey, let's all tell a story we agree on that represents our experience. And I think people are doing that. People are doing that. I just am excited to see more, and I'm excited to contribute
We
to
are
that.
the good and the bad thing of where we exist right now in time in Hollywood is that there is no Taika or Jordan Peele, the Vietnamese Taika or the Vietnamese Jordan Peele. That's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing, right? we exist right on
Right.
the cusp of that happening, you know. So it's a
Right.
great time to be in the business, and it's also a shitty time because we need our shot as well.
Yeah. Yeah. But I stay hopeful that that shot's coming.
Yeah.
Right. If not for me, then for somebody, then and if that person gets their shot, I'll champion their film like all night and
Absolutely.
day. Right.
Yeah. Jason, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. It was a pleasure meeting you for the first time in person, and it
Yeah.
was a pleasure getting to know you through this podcast. Thank you so much for coming on, and I look forward to having you back on with the feature film or whatever new project you have.
Hey, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah, and I love that we connected and all of a sudden we're on a podcast. So this is great.
Awesome. Thanks again, Jason.
All right, Ken. I'll talk to you later.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to The Vietnamese with Kenneth Nguyen. Special thanks to Brittany Tran, to Jane Nguyen, Catherine Nguyen, Tina Pham, Sydney Jamie, and Christo Trin. Please find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at The Vietnamese Podcast.